welcome to the Brookings Institution in exile. This is an event sponsored by the Brookings Intelligence Project. Our guest today is Mr. Malcolm Byrne. I'm extremely pleased to have Malcolm here today. Not only is he a great scholar, he's also a great friend. His official title is Deputy Director and Research Director of the National Security Archive, or NSA. Now, of course, it's not that NSA that he works for. The NSA he works for is one of Washington's greatest gems. It is the place where classified America meets its maker and is hopefully declassified, allowing transparency into government. It seeks to shine a light on what goes on behind the scenes inside of Washington. He is also the co-author of Becoming Enemies, a book about American diplomacy during the Iran-Iraq War, which I think is safe to say is the best book available on American diplomacy in the Iran-Iraq War. He now has a new book, Iran-Contra, which is based on an extraordinary amount of research in documents, in diaries, in interviews with individuals, with literally a mountain of material and documents that I don't think anyone else has ever systematically and seriously looked at.
Unless you're a prosecutor.
Unless you're a prosecutor. But in the end, as your book shows, they didn't look at them as well as they should have.
Probably true.
The picture that emerges out of this book, actually it's right there on the cover, changes, I think, our image of Ronald Reagan. And I think it changes it in a somewhat disturbing way. I'll quote from the conclusion. Too often the president and his aides took action first, then worried whether it was proper later. And I'd add to proper and legal later. At the heart, of course, of the Iran-Contra Scandal were two secret intelligence operations, which is why the Intelligence Project wants to focus light on this. One in Central America and one in Iran. These two intelligence operations were never properly notified to the Congress of the United States. Therefore, almost by definition, they were illegal right from the start, particularly the operation in Iran, but also the operation in Nicaragua. The Iran-Contra Scandal had immense consequences. I think that it is safe to say that the march of folly that led to the Iraq War in 2003, and which is still leading to Iraq wars in 2014, can be traced back in many ways to the Iran-Contra intelligence operation that led to the Iran-Contra Scandal. Worse, and I think the most disturbing part of this book, is that the oversight system, as Malcolm has already alluded, failed us. We didn't get oversight in the end. We got a lot of hearings, we got a lot of articles in the press, but there was no real systematic effort to prevent future presidents and future White Houses from abusing power. And last but not least, sadly, all of this has haunting timely reminders today, because the United States once again has hostages being held in the Middle East by extreme Islamist organizations, which have already demonstrated that they are prepared to carry out horrific acts of brutality. Two presidencies, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, were in many ways consumed by hostage issues, and unfortunately Barack Obama looks like he has one today. I'll ask you to turn off your cell phones now, and the formats here today is going to be very simple. I'm going to interview Malcolm for about 40 minutes or so about the book, using the prerogative of the chair, and then I'm going to open it up to you all to ask any questions that I wasn't smart enough to think of. So with that as introduction, let me start by asking you about Ronald Reagan, and where do you place him in the saga of the Iran-Contra Scandal?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor to be here, both at Carnegie and virtually at Brookings. And it's, you know, I'm so happy to be able to talk about this book that I've worked on for a very long time. You're right, this picture of Reagan is emblematic of where I think, of how he comes out of this affair. And where I see him fitting in is right up at the top. It's a very complicated story, as a lot of you will remember as I'm looking across the room here. There's not a lot of 20-somethings in the room, so all of you will remember the hearings and the long, drawn-out process. It was complicated because it affected events in 2 different countries, well, 3 different countries if you include Israel, which played a big part. It involved a lot of wonkish policy issues and a lot of gray, dull legal matters as the affair wound on and dragged on for years and years. So keeping on top of what all the issues were is a real challenge. In judging where Reagan fits, you have to sort of decide what exactly you're talking about in terms of Iran-Contra. Are you talking about what Reagan knew? Are you talking about what he believed? Are you talking about what people told him? Are you talking about what things happened maybe that were under his radar that Ollie North and others at the NSC staff were doing? It's a multi-layered kind of a story. But to put it as briefly as I can, I see Reagan as being the driving force behind the scandal and both elements of the scandal. On the Iran side, he was guided primarily by his concern for the hostages. He was widely acknowledged to have been emotional and very moved by his meetings with the hostage families in 1985 especially. And this really drove him. He wanted, for personal reasons, but also for political reasons. This is one of the great politicians of the 20th century. There's no doubting that he had political motivations too. He was intent on finding a solution to the hostage crisis. On the Contra side of things, he was less aware of what was happening on the part of his staff and aides from other agencies, but there seems, in my view, there's no doubt that he provided the guidance and created the atmosphere in which people like Robert McFarlane, his national security advisor, followed by John Poindexter, Oliver North, and all the others took their inspiration and took their instructions. You remember the famous phrase back in during the congressional hearings where McFarlane said that in 1984, President Reagan took him aside and said, "It's up to you to keep the Contras together, body and soul." This was in anticipation of very stringent restrictions on government aid to the Contras that were about to take place, the infamous Boland Amendment. And it was, as you look back at the record, at least as I saw it, it was clear to everybody, including Reagan, what was about to happen, that this was seen as a virtually complete shutdown of official U.S. Assistance to the Contras. But Reagan was not about to let them go. He was as emotional about the freedom fighters as he was about the hostages. And he was intent on finding ways to get around congressional prohibitions. Whether he understood everything that was to happen was legal or illegal, we can get into those details. But the basic point is that he was at the top of the pyramid, and without him, I don't think any of this would have happened.
The heart of the Iran affair was trading arms for hostages. Now, America has had a long policy, and we hear it today. We're not going to negotiate with terrorists. How do we end up negotiating with terrorists? And even worse, giving them weapons?
This is part of the complex story within a story. First of all, I just want to say that I was really surprised. A few days ago, I did what